I proposed to the General that what we would do is actually have a conversation rather than a speech. Angus does great speeches, as those of you would know who came to our conference on war in 2025. But we thought this was a good opportunity to actually have a slightly less formal discussion. If indeed you can have a less formal discussion sitting on a stage with 150 people sitting in front of you and a number of TV cameras, but we'll give it a go, Angus. Sure. And what I wanted to do was actually to start with the speech. You did give a very considered presentation at the dinner for our War in 2025 conference, which was about the re-emergence of political warfare. I was wondering, for this audience, can you give us a brief précis of what it is you said that evening? And in particular, what is it, Angus, that makes political warfare something that autocracies can pursue successfully and democracies are less good at?
Sure, thanks, Peter, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and join you today. My speech was really focused on that wide range of competitive options that powers can choose, should they wish to do so, and that some do choose. And I use examples of Russia's actions, whether it's in the Crimea or in some of the states bordering in Eastern Europe, that when the expected response is below the threshold of a violent conflict response, that some states will see advantage in moving to a competition that's beyond, instead of, or without regard to what we might describe as the expected rules and norms of an international order. Now, this is not new. It has been a truism of state behaviour through history, but I do think that we are seeing a re-emergence of this form of behaviour, and that it is challenging because its very definition is to act in ways and in mediums of communication between states that does not elicit a violent response, a war response as we would traditionally regard it from the state that is being affected. This is challenging because it either directly or quietly erodes the international norms, behaviours, rules, expectations, and so has the potential to undermine the entire system and to encourage a proliferation of that form of behaviour. Now, that's not something I think that Australia or any state who is committed to the opportunities, the values, the advantages of interstate discourse that is managed by rules, that's not in our interest whatsoever. And so I think it's a conversation to be had and a question to be asked about how do we understand that form of conduct, and indeed how do we consider appropriate responses or preferably mitigations to see that form of conduct less likely to occur.
Angus, are the democracies always destined to lose a political warfare battle?
No, but it is, historically speaking, apparently more difficult, simply because as democracies we are organically emergent in the different areas and sectors of civil society, government, private enterprise and the like. Less aligned, less coordinated, less focused in a whole of state capacity. And that is something that, as I spoke of in my speech, is more typically true of authoritarian powers. The effort and the control that the state asserts upon the people, as opposed to, in our democratic construct, the people asserting upon the state. And so while it's harder, it's in no way assured that it cannot be defended against or responded to, but it is harder.
A country like Australia, I think most people here in this room would say that democracy is a sort of a natural strength, actually. It's one of the attractive features of our political system. But do you see that we have any particular strengths when it comes to the political warfare contest?
Sure. First, I completely agree with that, Peter. Australia's democracy, its civil society, the sense of ourselves and that which we project into the world is a massively powerful, soft power strength for Australia and for all democracies. But I'd also add that we do have, and we have grown better and better at a developing and tight whole of government construct within the sense of the federal government and the federal to state alignment. There's a great deal of effort to seek to make sure that we don't see agencies and departments and elements of government operating at random or at odds or without alignment, to the degree that I think when I first joined the Army many years ago now, it was not apparent. It is much more apparent now. And the habits of cooperation across departments and agencies in the Commonwealth is very strong. And it's regarded as the norm of business. And when you're not doing that, it is notably odd and commented upon. So I think that's also a great strength.
That's interesting. That's a feature really of perhaps the post-9/11 world, Angus, I think, that we've become that way. Yeah.
I would actually go back to the modern emergence of this whole of government mindset. To me, emerges out of the lead up to and the experience that challenged us during the Interfet operation in East Timor, or Timor-Leste now. That was a first step after a generation absent conflict since our departure from Vietnam.
One more question on the political warfare front, or countering, I suppose, the effects of political warfare. I agree with you. I think it's inherently a whole of government challenge. But how do you see this from the ADF perspective? What's the role of the Defence Force in this situation?
Look, our Defence Force can do many things in contributing to building and supporting security, capacity building, relationships and understanding in our region with key partners, with those who we don't understand so well. That's a very important element of contribution. There are aspects in terms of defensive capacity that we can offer. And I think with the Australian Signals Directorate in the cyberspace, that's true. But whole of government, yes, and a more broadly conscious whole of nation about how does each element of our nation operate in an environment where, in the cyber sense, we are accessible, potentially vulnerable, if we're not conscious. We see a very mature approach to this in our finance and banking system, because they need to be, and they have been across a range of threat hackers. They've been under some form of pressure for some time now. Now, I think that there are many ways that you can consider how to be both an open society, but one that is appropriately protective of its interests and its values, and able to function in the world, presenting the that best Australia we wish to offer. The ADF is a part of it, but it's only a very small component.
So Angus, I wanted to turn to the overall strategic situation. You may know that a few weeks ago I wrote an article for The Australian, and of course I would never seek to exaggerate any of my judgments in those pieces, but I said that I thought we were moving into essentially a new Cold War situation. Am I being too pessimistic, CDF?
Look, I think it is, it'll sell you a newspaper column. And it's something that we should be conscious of simply because we should know our history. But history doesn't repeat, and history can inform and guide. If Mr. Google is correct, when I typed in the United States' largest trading partner, it tells me that its largest trading partner is China. That is a fundamental, it's a profound difference to the construct of that period of history that you speak of. And so I would rather offer the question, how do we find that constructive way forward between and with those two great powers in this world who are going to be the most influential bilateral relationship on this planet for the foreseeable future. And I have not heard anyone describe that construct that you've offered as a preferred future. So best we work on how to see other better futures emerge. And I don't think it is assured. I don't think it is where we are necessarily going. And I think there's a lot of option, a lot of space to see better paths emerge.
I'm a fan of, I think it's the Mark Twain comment that history doesn't repeat but it rhymes, Angus, and I think that you've mentioned the elephant in the room, China. China is, for all of its enormous strengths and for all of its importance as a trade partner with the US and with us and with hundreds of countries, or well over 100 countries, China is out to disrupt the international order. So what's your perspectives on how the international system should manage this fundamental challenge?
The international order as we know it is not now and has never been fixed and defined and immutable. It evolves. And so I'm expecting it will continue to evolve. One of the pressures of that evolution will be the presence, the scale of influence and the interests of China, as it will be other great powers. That is the way the order has always developed. But there are a number of other very significant centres of power on the planet that have a considerable interest, both in having an order, seeing it adhered to, seeing it evolve with the broadest consensus possible of nations and centres of power, economic and political influence in the world. So the United States clearly has been a significant, continues to be a significant setter of the international rules-based order. So does the European Union. So do many of the states now in the space of the great powers sweeping across India, Indonesia to Japan. And so do, quite reasonably, the expectations of Brazil and countries, the emergent BRICS. Now, my point here is the effort made into international institutions, multilateral fora, into seeing the order that we have respected and the order that we have evolved and changed through the bodies and mechanisms that do within their constructs enable evolution, that is the way that we should expect, and we should call out that expectation that the international order changes in an orderly fashion. If we simply look to the world from the perspective that might is right, there are very few countries on the planet who prosper. We certainly do not. We are an enormous beneficiary of a rules-based international order and of a steady and overwhelmingly consensus-driven change to that order. And I think that we need to recognise where our prosperity has emerged from and to champion the idea both of order and orderly change.
Defence and the ADF has been, I guess, part of that order establishing system, not necessarily just in the sense of the operational activities that we've been involved in, but also through the type of engagement that we have with countries. I think back to when I was in the department, Angus, leading our annual strategic dialogue with China, and the Chinese three-star general counterpart that I was dealing with said to me, Peter, after Pakistan, Australia is one of the countries that we have a closest defence relationship with. And I thought that was a very revealing comment, both about China and about Pakistan in some ways, but it nevertheless reflected the fact that we had we have now for 20 years or more had a strategic dialogue with China. How do you see the relationship from the point of view of the ADF and the PLA, the type of contact that you've had in your roles?
This is, I think, the 22nd year of our strategic dialogue, and it's been continuous throughout that time. We've got a constructive relationship. It's a modest relationship in size, but quite constructive. It connects at the most senior levels, the Secretary of the Department, Greg Moriarty, and myself, with key PLA leaders, down through engagement at two-star level, and then engagement in exercise activity and engagement, relationship building, perspective sharing, down to the soldier and junior officer level. It is modest, and it is one which we're very comfortable with and see the value in continuing. If you don't have mechanisms of dialogue and pathway for understanding, you're not in a good position to gain and be able to recognise the range of perspectives playing upon any particular security issue that might arise. So I think that we've moved beyond your description. It is not a relationship of scale and of depth of substance that you see in our alliance relationship with the United States or our enduring heritage relationship with the United Kingdom, for example, or indeed with the scale and strength of the relationship we have with Indonesia, our very near neighbour, but it is constructive and useful for both nations, and so I'm very pleased about that.
Looking at a broader strategic environment, what are the things that keep you awake at night beyond all those pesky possums at Duntroon?
Look, we have entered a period which I think can be characterised, at least at one level of analysis, as one of strategic competition, or potentially a period that's going to be characterised as one of strategic competition between great powers. Now, there's also a great deal of strategic cooperation, and that needs to be recognised as well. However, the return to attention of the tensions and interests and security considerations of great powers is going to be something I think that will be part of the professional life of any young person joining the national security community for some time. At the same time, we are not past the challenges of a modern form of terrorism. Now, I say modern, not meaning Islamist jihadist. I mean the fact that technology now empowers individuals in extraordinarily beneficial ways, but also it creates the opportunity for individuals, small groups, and non-state actors to be far more powerful than they have ever had the opportunity to be in the past, and able to direct their message globally as much as locally, instantaneously, like they have never been able to do so before. That means we're going to see in different forms and different reasons and different places a continuing issue, largely in the law and order space of terrorism, as at the same time we are dealing with the scale and challenges of great powers.
Angus, one of the artefacts of Australian defence planning over decades has been the 10-year warning time concept, which I guess was most clearly articulated by Paul Dibb many years ago when he in the 87 White Paper, made the case that we would have at least 10 years warning time of being able to assess the likelihood of a country harbouring an intent to attack Australia, because it would take about that long for that country to make those preparations. I guess we see it less these days in contemporary strategic thinking, but is it still a planning vehicle? And would you say, are we inside that 10-year time frame now from a defence planning point of view?
So if you think about a few ideas of their moment, we had the end of history, and that didn't quite work out. And we do sometimes talk about the end of geography. And in a cyber sense, that's probably true. In a space sense, to a certain degree, that is true, a certain degree. In the hard power realities of air, land and sea military operations, geography matters. And so warning time, like geography and history, hasn't gone away, but it's become more nuanced. What exactly are you speaking of being warned of? In the most advanced technologies, a hypersonic weapon travelling somewhere between, let's say, Mach 5 and Mach 16, you might have warning, but you might not be able to do anything with that warning. So in that sense, warning time is perhaps moot. In the cyber realm, I think it doesn't exist. You know after the event. But in many aspects of military consideration and broader national security consideration, it still has relevance. As soon as you make an idea like warning time more nuanced and complex, though, it becomes less difficult to communicate and perhaps less useful in capstone documents that are trying to explain in the broadest of senses national strategic policy intent.
Angus, let's talk Pacific Step Up. We've got the PM, I think, as we speak, flying to Tuvalu for the Pacific Islands Forum today, and I think we all welcome the very significant policy effort that the government is putting into regrowing, if that's the right term, our relations with the Pacific Island countries. Can you take us through Defence's part in that, and how do you see that evolving over the next little while?
I want to start by saying step up, not start up. Australia and the Australian Defence Force has been working in the Southwest Pacific for 101 years. since our first humanitarian assistance disaster relief operation into the Pacific in response to the outbreak of Spanish influenza in Samoa and Tonga in November and December of 1918. So I'm very proud of that, and that presence has been true ever since. The Defence Force is actively engaged in working with security partners through the Pacific, and we are a constant that can be assumed if invited by those nations when there might be a tsunami issue, a cyclone event, something that requires that more immediate response assistance. I'm pleased to see the work that is going on to develop the BlackRock peacekeeping and training facility in Fiji. That will be a facility accessible and intended by the Fijian government for regional partners to develop their peacekeeping skills and capacity. And I think that's a very positive way then that the Pacific Island community can contribute more widely internationally. At the same time, we now see the delivery of the third and shortly the fourth of the Guardian-class patrol boats, the vanguard of the Pacific Maritime Security Program, replacing the Pacific Patrol Boat Program. A network of very impressive patrol boats with enhanced aerial surveillance and with, in time, and defined by that Pacific community, a fusion centre to link and collate data, understand the situation, pass it out and enable Pacific Island nations more than ever before to better control and manage their maritime resource. And for a community that describes itself, and I think quite aptly and appropriately, as the blue continent, it is the maritime resource that is the greatest wealth and opportunity for their future. So that's a huge contribution. While at the same time we have training teams, mobile mentoring teams and so forth, actively engaging throughout the Southwest Pacific. I've been up in Papua New Guinea recently, and you can see not just the quality of the work being done, but the very tangible appreciation by our partners and neighbours. So I'm very pleased. I'm quietly proud. I think that the hallmark of this work is about listening to what that Pacific Island community seeks and understand how in the security sector we can make a contribution. We don't do this in isolation. The New Zealanders, the United States, Japan, many countries working together, and it's a very positive thing to see too.
I know you're personally interested in and committed to the relationship with Papua New Guinea, and PNG is different from the other Pacific Island countries. It will, I think, within a decade have a population of around 10 million or so. It's a significant country with its own set of strategic interests. How do you think about that relationship, and what are your objectives in terms of the cooperation with the PNGDF and Papua New Guinea more generally?
Sure. Just context setting, it's our closest neighbour, and sadly a lot of Australians don't actually know that. And I'm quite serious about that. It's 4 kilometres from Australia, depending on the tides and the conditions. 4 kilometres from Australia, it now has a population estimated variously somewhere between 7.5 and 11 million people. Right? So let's say 8.5 million people. And it's anticipated that population will double in about 15 years.
So 20 million in 15 years?
Yeah, something like
wow.
that.
Okay.
So this is a It's a big country in comparative population terms to Australia, as well as it's an order of magnitude in scale larger than any of the other Pacific Island countries that we engage with. It's also resource rich, but it has many challenges of a nation that has those resources, has some fragile economic, social, environmental and political settings. And it has been a partner in development assistance work more broadly and in defence engagement for a very long time. That work with the Papua New Guinea Defence Force and the Australian Defence Force has been about building professional standards, capacity, governance and administration, and to listen to how they wish to see that force evolve and grow to be a contributor to the security of Papua New Guinea, to the resource security of the maritime environment that Papua New Guinea controls, and also to be an influence into the bulging youth population in Papua New Guinea through a cadet scheme. All of these things, I think, are an important contribution by Australia, but within one sector, to our nearest neighbour. And of course, the Development Assistance Program covers a range of sectors. To my mind, it is a country that we should know much more about, and we should see Australians much more actively engaged. And for those who go, who actually visit Papua New Guinea, it is a fascinating, extraordinary, diverse and culturally rich environment with people who are, to my mind, extraordinary and worth caring about.
Stunningly beautiful country.
Indeed.
Manus is obviously a place to talk about in the context of now, how do you describe it, a joint PNG, Australia, possibly US facility. What's your thinking about that? How would you like to see that develop, say, over 5 years or so?
So there is a Papua New Guinea Defence Force maritime element patrol boat base at Lombrum on the eastern end of the island of Manus. This is a sovereign Papua New Guinea Defence Force base, and it is going to continue to be such. Our work in developing that joint facility is to see the Papua New Guinean maritime element patrol boat capacity enhanced so as to assure their operation of the 4 Guardian class patrol boats that Australia is progressively gifting to Papua New Guinea, 1 last year and 3 more over the next 3-4 years. What we want to be confident is that they have the facilities, they have the capacity, they have the training support and the technical support to be able to operate those patrol boats from their sovereign base, and that base has the infrastructure and the sustainability to see the patrol boat effort a significant contributor to the control of and the right revenue flow of Papua New Guinean resources and resource extraction in the civil fisheries sector coming into Papua New Guinea. And at the same time that they can operate with near neighbours and form part of a wider maritime community. Now, this effort is in its early days, and it's going to be one which is progressive and developmental, but I think it offers great possibility. And so we're very pleased to be there, the United States with us, and the Papua New Guinean Defence Force and Papua New Guinean government, I think, are leading in terms of what it is they want and what it is that they welcome from our efforts to contribute and develop that base. A base established in the Second World War and has been a Papua New Guinean base ever since.
Of critical strategic importance in the Second World War. Is there a model of what the Australian presence will look like there going forward?
No, but I think it's going to be focused, and we'll progressively develop this. It's going to be focused on how do we contribute to the building of the consolidation, the maturity of that maritime element. And then ask the question, are there next steps that logically support the relationship between Australia and Papua New Guinea, and focused on the maritime environment?
Okay, next question in this strategic workout, Angus, US. We've just had Osman. Obviously you would have been closely involved in that one. Key outcomes from an Australian defence perspective?
There is no question in my mind our alliance is strong, it's deep, it's enduring, and the conversations, the discussions were very positive, constructive, with opportunity being acknowledged on both sides for continuing development in areas of capability development, in the depth and quality of our training and our exercise relationship, in working in new areas for Australia, or advancing areas of cooperation in aspects such as cyber or the effects that are emergent from space. I was very pleased, and a real sense that the alliance is not an old thing. It is something that is made new on every occasion that we engage, and there is absolutely opportunity and capacity to build and grow further the relationship between our two nations. Now, of course, I focus in the defence space, but this is a relationship that is extraordinarily broad, deep, comprehensive, and having just come from Perth over the weekend with an opportunity to engage with the Australian-United States Leadership Dialogue, you can see with 12 congressional representatives in attendance at that dialogue, it's a relationship that, if not unique, it's one of those few relationships in the world that is extraordinary and absolutely worth continuing to develop.
Angus, I don't know if you've read Hugh White's new book, How to Defend Australia, $32.95 at any good bookshop. Actually, you don't need to. You can read my review free, available on the Strategist site. But how do you respond to Hugh's argument that the US simply can no longer be relied upon to, I guess, meet its alliance commitments in the Asia-Pacific region?
Yeah. I am... is it Mark Twain also who reminds us that rumours of my death may be premature? Yeah, I am not a supporter of that thesis at all, full stop. And how many times do you have to have very, very senior members of the United States policy community on both sides of the aisle moving through the Indo-Pacific, engaging, speaking with, reminding of, and affirming before you go, yeah, they actually have been here since the White Fleet and they're probably going to stay here. And if you believe that the business of the business of the United States is business. That's
the business of business is business.
Yeah,
not Mark Twain, but a good one. Yeah.
That phrase that the business of the United States is business. If that's all your view is, and business is aggregating to a centre of gravity in the Indo-Pacific, there is absolutely no logic to this view that the United States will not be engaged and present in the Indo-Pacific. Now, I realise that Hugh is speaking of a particular strategic construct and a view that I think he articulates in a very eloquent and intensely logic-driven pathway, but to me it is, with apologies to a person whose intellect and contribution I deeply, deeply admire, but I think Hugh is presenting what I describe as a theoretical construct as opposed to an applied construct. And in the applied world where we actually live, there's so much more nuance, so much more grey in the conversation. So I don't come to his conclusions. And I have read your review, and I've read a few others as well. I don't feel alone in this. However, I would ask you to consider to look at all sides of a conversation. The worst thing to be in a democracy is to be an autocracy of single thought. So absolutely, engage in an analysis of what Hugh says or what I say or what Peter says, and then engage your thought in what you think about this.
He's just wrong, isn't he? That's what you're trying to say, I think, CDO.
And it's a great morning to be here at ASPI. Yeah.
Moving right along, folks. Let's quickly touch on Southeast Asia. One of the things which has been, I think, a core objective of Australian policy documents for decades has been the aspiration to make more of the relationship within Indonesia than we have been able to do. What's your sense of why that has been such a challenge to build that type of relationship, and what would be your own aspirations for what we could and should be doing with the Indonesians?
So I've, about a week and a half ago, spent some time with my counterpart Panglima, Air Chief Marshal Sujanto, up in Yogyakarta, and this was at the high-level committee discussions that we hold on an annual basis. Extremely warm, extremely engaging, constructive, forward-looking, with a very wide range of common interests and an aspiration to further drive the development of our defence and security relationship. I'm very positive about that. I think that Indonesia is and has always been, in our strategic policy conception, an extraordinarily important country to Australia and to our region. It continues to be so, and the relationship is strong and going in the right direction, and I think in a very, very positive way. So we are conducting complex exercise activities with Indonesia. We saw an Indonesian squadron come down for exercise Pitch Black last year. We've seen opportunities across the range of our defence space to engage. This is all good, and I'm very confident it will continue.
I'd agree with that, and I must say, from an ASPI perspective, we have a pretty close, regular strategic dialogue with Indonesian counterparts, and I can see that that conversation is changing. It's actually becoming much more frank and engaged, and I hope that you're right, that we're on a really good, potentially good path here. So look, we're coming pretty close to the end of the session, CDF. I'll close by asking you this one. It's you've been in the job now for a year and a month, and I haven't counted the days. Has there been anything that surprised you about the job? What has pleased you as you've gone around looking at the organisation, and what, if anything, has disappointed you?
Thanks. No, I haven't been surprised, which is nice. It kind of means that after quite a few years working within defence and wider government, the pathway of development actually got you there as a person who sort of understood the system around you and wasn't surprised by anything. I think the thing that most pleases me and consistently impresses me is the quality of our people. And the quality of our people, at least by comparison to my own sense of what I was like at different levels and circumstances in my own career. If I go all the way to the origins at our Australian Defence Force Academy and the military colleges, the single service military colleges, that is an extraordinary generation of young Australians, or perhaps I should say it is representative of an extraordinary generation of young Australians who give me great confidence in our future. Now, there are lots of challenges in the world, and we've spoken of some of them in issues such as great power contest, terrorism and so forth. But rather than dwell on what are the challenges, I look around at the people who are going to be the inspiration, the innovation, the generators of initiative and opportunity to solve those challenges. And I am a person who looks at the world glass half full and with a belief that the future presents great opportunity and possibility, and not in a narrow and Australia-only sense, but in a community of our region and of the world where we can write that history rather than wring our hands and worry about it. And that's a good place to be. Extraordinary privilege to find myself the Chief of the Defence Force, even more extraordinary to realise the amazing talent that is supporting Australia within that Defence Force. Thank you.
Angus, I've worked with a number of your predecessors very closely in the job, and I've worked with you closely in different jobs. I know how demanding the CDF job can be. What are your personal techniques for sort of coping with the pressure? How do you do that?
Yeah. Try to get some sleep, try to do some exercise, try to avoid eating yellow food, as my wife says. Party pies and sausage rolls, yellow food. And I'm very happy to occasionally dive into a completely mindless piece of, pulp science fiction to
talking about my newspaper
away.
Articles again, are you? Isn't this?
And your newspaper articles, to step away from it all. But I'm not a person who goes to sleep anxiously worrying. I find that many solutions emerge from a good night's rest, and that you do have to, as you progress through your career and personal and professional life, you do have to take care of yourself, and that enables you to sustain the fairly constant routine and rigours of this job or any other job. So everyone has a pathway. To me, it's a simple life, but it is one full of both the challenge of a world in change and also the energy that gives to come to work every morning and think, well, what are we going to be talking about today? And how can we move this conversation forward? It is an extraordinary time to be in the national security space, to be in defence, to be in Australia.
Angus, for my part, I must say I've never met a party pie I didn't like. I agree with you on the sleep front, absolutely. It's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Can you please thank Angus Campbell?
Thanks, Peter.